Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really passionate, deeply charged piece of contemporary political commentary. The source video we are analyzing is a fiery broadcast that tackles everything from the philosophy of American history to some highly debated modern-day domestic grievances. Because the original material moves incredibly fast and covers a vast array of topics, our goal today is to break down the host's overarching worldview so we can clearly understand the core arguments being made. To make sense of this wide-ranging commentary, we've broken it down into four distinct, logical themes: defending American history, debating America's founding values, crime and immigration claims, and finally, critiquing political elites. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, defending American history, or as we're calling it, the battle for national memory. Now, what's really interesting about this is that the source video actually begins not with modern politics, but with a deep philosophical argument about why historical memory is absolutely essential to a nation's survival. The host uses this really relatable metaphor, basically asking us to think of our country exactly like a family home. What makes a home special isn't the marble countertops or the expensive furniture, right? It's the memories. He argues that without those memories, a house is literally just wood and drywall. And, according to the source, a nation operates the exact same way. Our historical memory, even the really messy or painful parts, is what breeds this deep, almost irrational attachment to our country. The host argues that this attachment is exactly what ideological adversaries seek to destroy. Following that logic, the video outlines a specific three-step theory on how these ideological adversaries, who the host frequently refers to as communists, actually operate. Step 1 is to attack historical memory. This means erasing with the good and the bad stories, knocking down statues, changing street names, the whole shebang. Step 2, unmoor and demoralize citizens. By severing that emotional attachment to the past, citizens basically stop caring about what happens to their home. And then step 3, with the population completely detached, these adversaries can swoop right in and rebuild society in their own entirely new image. And this brilliantly illustrates the stark contrast the source is making. On one side, he points to historical examples of memory erasure, specifically citing Mao's Cultural Revolution in China, which aimed to destroy the four olds: old ideas, culture, customs, and habits. But then, on the flip side, the host passionately counters this by listing American triumphs that citizens should be fiercely proud of. We're talking airplanes, spaceships, the internet, telephones. The core argument here is that celebrating these achievements is actually a patriotic duty, and it acts as a direct defense against ideological takeover. Moving right along to Section 2. Debating America's founding values, focusing on the melting pot versus Christian ideals. Here, the commentary tackles a highly contested debate over the nation's foundational identity. First up, the host plays a clip of Democratic Representative Raul Grijalva. In it, Grijalva argues against Christian nationalism, stating that America is a secular melting pot built by immigrants of all nationalities and religions. Well, in a pretty fiery rebuttal, the source completely rejects this modern melting pot narrative. He dismisses any comparison between early 1900s immigrants and the current wave of undocumented immigration. Furthermore, the host forcefully argues that the nation was, in fact, built strictly on Christian ideals. To try and validate this view of a Christian foundation, the source attempts to root his argument in historical precedent. The host specifically cites an anecdote about John Adams. Supposedly, while acting as the first ambassador to England, Adams addressed King George by saying, "We share the same language and we share the same religion. Therefore, we are and forever will be bonded together as brethren." For the host, citing this specific quote is meant to be undeniable proof that the nation was fundamentally established upon these shared religious principles, which directly contradicts the secular viewpoint we just talked about. Okay. Let's pivot to Section 3, crime and immigration claims, and a shifting focus to domestic priorities. So, the crucial point is how the host abruptly moves from abstract history to some highly charged contemporary domestic grievances. He highlights a very specific number, 273. Citing a social media post from Donald Trump, the host claims that 273 Americans have been shot in Chicago since the recent conflicts involving Iran began. The source uses this really specific juxtaposition, comparing domestic crime stats in a major American city to foreign conflicts, to argue that the current political leadership is fatally distracted. The implication is that politicians are pouring their energy and resources into foreign affairs while completely ignoring the safety of American citizens right here at home. The source then really personalizes these domestic grievances. The host lists specific individuals. Sheridan Gorman, Laken Riley, Jocelyn Nungare, and Patty Morin. The video emphasizes that these were innocent citizens whose lives were tragically cut short, often pointing specifically to crimes committed by undocumented immigrants. Now, these tragic stories are utilized to construct a very specific narrative, that Democratic leadership prioritizes undocumented immigrants over native-born citizens, and that current immigration policies are having devastating, fatal consequences on the local level. Which brings us to our final theme, Section 4, critiquing political elites, and specifically the Pelosi hit-and-run narrative. Let's move on and see how this builds into a broader argument about elite privilege and hypocrisy. To build this case, the source chronologically maps out a localized news story regarding Paul Pelosi, husband of former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. The video notes that back in 2022, Paul Pelosi pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor DUI. Then, the host outlines a newly reported incident from a Friday afternoon in Napa County. Supposedly, around 2:30 p.m., Pelosi struck a legally parked Tesla and left the scene, only to be found about a quarter-mile away shortly after, when his own vehicle literally became disabled. For the host, you see, this isn't just a local traffic story. It's the ultimate proof of a corrupt system. He boldly asserts that if Pelosi's car hadn't broken down, the public never would have known about it. The host concludes that political elites escape accountability and that they only confess, they only apologize when they're caught. And in making this point, the source actively praises platforms like Elon Musk's X. He views them as the final remaining digital town halls where the alleged hypocrisy of the political elite can actually be exposed to the public. So, what does this all mean? We've seen how this source uses a blend of historical nostalgia, religious foundational claims, stark domestic crime statistics, and localized scandals to paint this vivid picture of a nation in peril. But the bigger question for us to consider is this. As online platforms become the primary battleground for political discourse, how do these highly charged, emotion-driven narratives shape our collective understanding of national identity? It's a fascinating look at modern media reality for sure, and definitely something to chew on. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the narratives around you.